अस्सलाम वालेकुम वरहमतुल्लाह। उम्मीद है कि आप सब खैरियत से होंगे। आज 28 मई को हम एक बार फिर आपके सामने मौजूद हैं और इस वक्त जो हमारा टॉपिक है वो पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ पैलेस्टाइन पास्ट, प्रेजेंट एंड फ्यूचर के हवाले से है। और ये तख्लीकी की पैलेस्टाइन टॉक सीरीज़ है जिसके में हम पैलेस्टाइन के हवाले से उसका फ्यूचर, उसका पास्ट और बाकी जो उसके पॉलिटिक्स एस्पेक्ट्स हैं वो इंशाल्लाह डिस्कस करेंगे। तो आज हमारे साथ जो स्पीकर हैं आयशा मजहर हैं। आयशा मजहर को दावत देती हूँ कि वो अपनी टॉक को स्टार्ट करें।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Soudah. जैसा कि आज हमारे यहाँ थर्ड सेशन है that is related to the politics of Palestine issue. Basically, in this session, we will try to discuss the contemporary politics of this conflict or this issue, because in previous two lectures we have tried to form a detailed session of its history, and now it's important to know about what it is about on the political front, because these days majority aspects are being handled through the politics. So coming to the next slide. First of all, let us have an insight of the agreements and practices that are being that have been done already regarding this issue. First and the foremost one were the Sykes-Picot Agreement. There are many ancient or the older agreements. For example, the one of Hazrat Umar, but that has little to do with the contemporary politics. So, as we're talking about contemporary politics, so I will start from 1916 when this movement actually started. So this was basically a secret agreement between Britain and France that in the wake of the World War One and other circumstances, as Ottoman Empire has already declined, and now this was the time when Ottoman Empire was called the sick man of the Europe. So they had actually decided in a secret agreement that when Ottoman Empire will be disintegrated, which areas will be controlled by which power amongst France and Britain. To further remind you, it is important to mention that this was the time that was the peak of the colonialism in Europe. Although afterwards there was a sharp decline, but this was the peak of colonialism, and colonialism was an era where only those states were considered powerful who had maximum territory. So European powers were striving their best to acquire as much territory as they can. So the moment they realized that the Ottoman Empire was going to be disintegrated, they actually decided to how its parts will be divided among the conquerors. So afterwards, there was a Balfour Declaration in 1917 when Britain actually openly declared that they actually promised to create a Jewish state in Arab world or Palestine. Then in 1940, meanwhile, in between there were many small agreements. Some were between, for example, one that I would like to mention here, because that has to do with the Palestinian conflict. That was between France and America in 1928, in which it was decided that it was a Paris Treaty, and in this treaty it was decided that no power can occupy any territory with the force and claim it to be its legitimate territory. Before 1928, it was a legitimate and legal act to occupy another territory by war and claim it to be yours. But after 1928, it's against international law. So we know that Jewish migration had already started, but the Israel was declared as an independent, newly born state in 1948. So this right here is the falsification of the claims of Jews to have Israel as the basis of their power and their oppressive means. Then afterwards, there were, if we, because this was just a slide about agreements in fact, so I had mentioned it not so clearly. But between 1948 and these Camp David agreement or accords, there were two wars fought between, not two wars, one war that was fought between, that was the war of 1967. And in that war, before that war, Arabs were considerate of the fact, and they were quite boasting this fact that it is an Arab-Israeli conflict, and that we are Arabs, and their typical superiority complex that actually took them. But after that 1967 war, when Israel actually captured the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights and much of the territory of Lebanon and Jordan, this idol of their arrogance was actually crushed, and they actually had to come to a Camp David Accord with Israel, where the president of Egypt, who was Anwar Sadat, who actually signed a deal with Israel, and as a result, Egypt became the first ever Arab country to recognize Israel. However, Israel actually freed some of the occupied territory of Egypt. Then there were Oslo Accords, and Oslo Accords. This is not one accord. That is why they're called accords. So, because they were spanning over some 1.5 decade. So these were between Israeli stakeholders and between Yasser Arafat. For example, but they were not successful initially, because he was offered monetary reparations, like we will compensate the loss of Palestine with money and with financial aid. But Yasser Arafat categorically denied it and refused to accept this offer. So first of all, they were like sabotaged because of this very offer. Afterwards, due to then again in the second round of Oslo Accords, Yasser Arafat actually died. So because of that, the whole process was sabotaged, and no fruitful, peaceful settlement could have been done. So now another prominent deal that has been done by Donald Trump, that is the Abraham Accord, or as they call it, deal of the century, in which there was a 2 decades old resolution of US Congress, but none of the presidents since 2 decades got the audacity to sign it actually. But Trump did this. Remember, Trump actually devised a plan to financially aid Israel as Israel in that territory. Moreover, he recognized the Israeli right to have its capital in the Jerusalem, because that has the historical background, and to mention again, Jerusalem is an international territory. It didn't belong to any of the stakeholders that are Israel and Palestine. But after this accord, this status of Jerusalem has got dubious. However, to mention again, almost 132 states of the world had already denied Israel right to keep Jerusalem as its capital. So these are some of the basic agreements and pacts, and from these agreements and pacts, what are the political aspects? You actually get to know that how the colonial powers and the colonial masters actually worked on the policy of divide and rule throughout this whole process, and how the Egypt actually tend to compromise on this very conflict in the wake of Camp David agreement after 1967 war. So these are some of the aspects of it. And now the Abraham Accord, it shows that how US, recently our foreign minister mentioned the word deep pockets, and he had been severely criticized throughout the Europe for using that term, because it is considered to be anti-Semitist term. and but the Abraham Accord and rest of the statements show that, and how we mentioned earlier, that Zionism, Christians are basically the Protestant Christians are actually supported of what we call it, Zionism, and they actually want Jews to settle there so that they can conquer it from them and then actually form a Christian state over there. So this is whole this all has got a long background. So okay, I have realized that throughout these three sessions, not three sessions, yesterday, I felt like that due to the shortage of time, I actually forgot to link the things with the contemporary things. So it actually became sort of, it gave an image that the religion, it was a religious issue before, in the ancient times when we were not present, and today it is just a regional or a political or an economical or an issue of international politics. No, even today it is it's a religious issue, and we can only solve it because it has this issue has its genesis in its religious roots. So if at any moment, voluntarily or knowingly or unknowingly, I gave this impact that it was not a religious issue these days, it's not like that. I want to clarify this point, that for me and for any Muslim around the corner, it is a religious aspect. So coming to the next slide, I will explain it a little bit more, because the first point, that is the Treaty of Westphalia 1648. International system has a lot to do with all the conflicts throughout the world going on today, because it was the Treaty of Westphalia 1648 that actually abolished the system of what we used to call monarchs and expansionist powers and imperialism. It actually gave way to nation state system, although colonialism and imperialism actually was extended up till 20th century. But this initial treaty was actually the start of decline of this entire system. But it actually divided the world into nation states. For example, mm, it was it was Hindustan, and today we are India and Pakistan. Although we had some nation theory and we had some ideological logics behind it, but many ethnicities throughout the world. For example, if you take the example of Kurds, the Kurds are divided into four countries of the four states of Arab world, but they actually claim that we are one ethnicity and we have a right to live in as one state. So right now their conflict is going on, but this is just because Kurds living on one side of one state's border has nothing to do with the Kurds living on the other side of the border of another state. So mm, the Treaty of Westphalia has divided Muslims, and Treaty of Westphalia led to 1924, when um, Ottoman Empire, the last of the Khilafat of Muslims, was but because Westerners divide us, because colonizers divide us, I believe that we should never accept it as it is. It is a system that divides us. We are not in the upper hand. So yes, we are will be a huge mistake on our part, and we should actually because united we stand and divided we fall, and the nation state system is actually one of the neo-colonial policy of divide and rule. Mandate system that actually gave the mandate of Palestine to the Britain under the auspices of a League of Nations, and then the Britain actually made sure that under the garb of making Palestinians civilized and modern, from the Europe and Western world to Palestine and Arab as they can. So, role of regional powers had been really crucial here. Egypt initially had a very staunch opposition towards Israel under the government of Jamal Nasser. Then the era of Anwar Sadat came, and he signed a peace treaty with Israel under that Camp David Accord, for which he actually received a Nobel Peace Prize, but it had actually set given had a setback on the Palestinian cause. But given the fact that the Golan Heights and the Sinai Peninsula was actually recovered from Israel in the wake of this, so this is actually a positive aspect of this very accord, because we get to know that like it was giving more and more to Israel and recovering nothing. However, Palestine issue remains standstill, and it actually had been through multiple wars and intifadas in which its regional powers had little to exercise. For example, Jordan is the neighboring country of this Palestine, but Jordan had the international territory of Jerusalem was given under the administrative control of Jordan. But today, because of Jordan's lenient policies and the oppressing policies of Israel, Jordan has too little control over what we call Palestine, and has also been the distinguishing instance. For example, Hamas is a Sunni organization, but it is backed by Iran against Israel, because Iran is very much very much against the stance of Israel for having Palestine as its nation. Fast forward, moving to 9/11, that actually shifted the global narrative in the what we can say favor of Israel, because that was the time when the whole concept was orchestrated, where the terrorism was and the Muslim fundamentalism was given rise throughout the world, and it was actually highlighted that difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist was amalgamed, it was blurred, and there was no clear vision given between them. But Israel sat for terrorism and freedom fighting, because in the way if we see in the light of the conventions and resolutions of United Nations, if we see under the light of historical agreements, it is the clear cut fact that the existence of Israel is an illegitimate and illegal instance, and that cannot be supported. For example, even the Westerners realize it, and one of the very prominent example is the recent support of Ireland for Palestine. But West has yet to understand this, but they actually understand this, and they are using all these means just to sabotage our cause. And okay, so again, I would mention that it is not a political conflict. It is not just a political conflict. Politics are just you can say politics is a beat to actually further the cause of Israel, but politics is not everything. Coming forward, I have mentioned a point here, that is of collective security and extended deterrence. These are the terms of international relations and international law, basically, which we would actually discuss in pretty much detail in our last session, or pretty much we would. I want to actually organize that tomorrow. That is the related related to international law, the Palestinian issue and international law. Collective security is a concept where where a group of states actually form an alliance to protect each other in the wake of any emergency or any conflict or any problem. For example, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was formed in 1949 by USA, and it contains many countries from the northern pole and northern hemisphere basically. As I defined it already, they considered attack on one is attack on all. So when one of their interests or states is attacked, all of them would respond collectively. And there is a concept that is further related to it, that is of extended deterrence. I will give one example of extended deterrence. For example, Japan does not have an nuclear program of its own, despite being technologically very modern, more than Britain and France. Japan decided not to have a nuclear program of its own. However, it is under the nuclear umbrella of United States, and that is the extended deterrence of United States over Japan. Now these are some of the realities of our modern international system. Okay, that the concept of collective security exists and the concept of extended deterrence exists, that you can protect one of your allies if he or she is in, if she states it's she for the state, Aisha. So if she's under threat from your common enemy, you can actually give them the shield of your collective security. And moreover, if you're a powerful enough state, or if you're a nuclear power, you can actually give them your extended deterrence or keep them under your deterrence umbrella. So what I want to mention here is actually the purpose of mentioning it here was that the first thing that we actually mention when we say that why don't Muslim states, Muslim powers having so much wealth and power do not support Palestine? Okay, we and one of the basic argument that we give is that just because the system is not created by us, just because we are on the lower hand and we are divided into nations, and that is why we cannot support them. uh, as I mentioned here, and I gave you two examples, one is of NATO and one is of the Japan, that this can be done in modern international system as well. There are means in international system, modern international system, where you can actually support your allies, and you do not have to do it illegitimately or make it be labeled as terrorism. You can do it legitimately and under the legal rights given by United Nations and its organs. Coming forward, future prospects, here we will discuss that in detail. There are two ways to live in a system. One is that you actually change that value system, and that way is called a revolution. And the other one is that you actually live within that system, and you actually work within that system. That is the system of conformation. Okay, our basic aim should be revolution. Okay, because without revolution we cannot have institutions and system of or like that is feasible for us. For example, without Khilafah we are divided into factions and we have our own interest, and we cannot actually serve one of them. Like even if we have individual interest, we cannot serve them. For example, Saudi Arabia and Iran are trying their best to serve their individual motives from the past 70 years, but little success had they got throughout these decades. But had there been some khilafah, we would have been one collective entity, and we could have responded to these threats in a much stronger way. Then the next point that I actually mentioned, that is the jihad against oppressors. Revolutionary means actually include a jihad, and however in conformative section 2 I have mentioned something like this, but we will discuss that later because that is related to contemporary politics. So seeking knowledge, excelling in technology and human resource, developing economic means, and like creating your own softwares. For example, you cannot post something on social media in this, say, under this system, because it is controlled by them. It is not your system, so you are not controlling it. When you are not controlling it, you cannot propagate what your agenda is, you cannot propagate what your legitimate right is. So you actually lose the fight just right here. Okay, so revolution basically calls, one of the aspect of revolution calls for actually setting up this system on havoc and creating your own system that is given by Allah and his prophet. And remember, it is not in jurisdiction of a person to create that system. This is where this actually had been going on since the past 2 or 3 decades. We actually need to have leaders who are the supporters of Khilafah. We actually need to have leaders who actually support this revolution. Then those leaders need to have unity among themselves, and that would be the time when we'll be able to cause this revolution. Coming to the next phase, that is of confirmation, that even if you do not upset the system that is going on, how can we actually stay within this system and actually use its means and values to actually further the cause of Palestine or further the cause of Muslim Ummah? That is through international lobbying, economic and diplomatic means. Okay, and that is currently not in our favor, because the majority of lobbying throughout the world is the Jewish lobby, and they are trying their best to legitimize their illegitimate state. And economic and diplomatic means, lobbying is a type of diplomacy. So, however, economic means, if you talk about, they are super control है Jews का इस पे. So we actually need to devise mechanism, and it is in our head that, for example, through our GDP growth, through our infrastructure development, through our human resource development, through revising technological means, through developing softwares, through developing applications, through developing overall infrastructure and logistics, we can actually conform to this system, and we can actually come to a position. For example, in international relations, power is something that you have when you can make your enemy do something which they had not done otherwise. Okay, पावर आपके पास वो चीज होती है, वो एबिलिटी होती है, जिसकी वजह से आप अपने दुश्मन से वो काम करा सकते हैं जो उसने बसूरत दीगर नहीं करना था. ठीक है, so you have to get this power if you want to survive within this international system. Okay, coming to the next concept that I already mentioned, that is of collective security and R2P. हमारा 38 countries, 34 countries का alliance, जिसके head हमारे साबका chief of army staff General Raheel Sharif, and that is actually right there, and that could have got the concept of collective security, but I don't know what they are up to right till now. But the concept of collective security that I already elaborated, that attack on one is attack on all, and if your ally is facing a threat against a common enemy, you actually protect them from them. And this collective security is under the resolutions of United Nations, and it is a legitimate act under the auspices of United Nations. R2P is a responsibility to protect. This is basically a modern law that is under that it is too like it was accepted under United Nations in 2015 categorically. However, it has been practiced throughout for the last 2 or 3 decades, and US has used this right and responsibility multiple times in multiple conflicts throughout the world. So responsibility to protect is where you actually protect the territory of your neighboring state or your allied state, and this actually forms the similar idea that is related to the collective security. Seeking knowledge and excelling in technology and human resource remains constant here, that you cannot actually fight them without excelling in those means. So these are some of the future prospects for this entire conflict that you have two ways. You can either cause a revolution or you can be conformative. Revolution में हम उसकी हमास की एग्जांपल दे सकते हैं, they are actually fighting for it, and confirmation में हम PLO की एग्जांपल ले सकते हैं that actually became conformative after the Oslo Accords. So this is the whole scenario, this is the whole picture. And recently the conflict is going on, and I have devised a picture of what means you can actually use in order to further your instance and stance in this international system. So these are the political aspects of Palestinian conflict. These are the actually bits and pieces of political aspects of Palestinian issue. Thank you so much for your time. Jazakallah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Thank you so much.